The screaming started before sunrise. I was in the kitchen making pancakes when I heard my wife yelling from the front of the ranch. At first I thought maybe one of our goats had gotten out again, but then I heard another voice, louder, shriller. It was that woman again. The HOA president. Karen. I dropped the spatula and ran outside, barefoot, still in my sleep shirt, and what I saw made me stop in my tracks. Karen was standing in the middle of our gravel driveway, phone in her hand, recording my wife like she was catching a criminal. My wife, calm, controlled, and with her arms folded across her badge, was standing firm. Behind her, one of our ranch gates hung slightly open, and Karen was shouting at her, "You can't be here. This land is under HOA regulation. You're trespassing and threatening me." My wife didn't move. Her voice was like steel. "Ma'am, you came through our fence without permission. That is criminal trespass. You need to step back now." Karen's voice cracked as she dialed 911. "I'm calling the cops. You're harassing me. You're an intruder and a danger to this neighborhood." But here's the thing. My wife is the police. Not just a regular officer either. She's the newly appointed police chief of our entire county. And Karen? She had no idea. Right then, I saw my wife take a slow step forward, lifting her badge. But before she could say a word, the 911 operator picked up on Karen's phone and Karen shouted, "There's a dangerous woman on my street pretending to be the police." I couldn't believe it. She just called the cops on the police chief. I stepped forward to stop this madness, but I was too late. Karen's mouth was still running. And my wife? She was slowly removing her outer jacket to show the full police uniform underneath. And that's exactly when sirens started to scream in the distance. That's when everything changed. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. It started 3 months earlier when we moved into a quiet neighborhood just outside of town. My name is Daniel, and my wife's name is Melissa. We'd been dreaming of owning a piece of land for years, someplace peaceful, with space for a few animals and wide open skies. After Melissa was promoted to police chief, we sold our house in the city and bought a ranch on the edge of Pine Hill Estates. It wasn't inside the main HOA community, but the land we bought used to be part of the original subdivision before being sold off decades ago. The old ranch house needed work, but the land was beautiful. Green pastures, a small barn, and a shimmering creek that ran along the back edge. The first few weeks were peaceful. Melissa got up early to check on the livestock, and I worked from home doing freelance writing. We kept to ourselves. Planted flowers by the porch, fixed up the old barn. Nothing fancy. Then came the first note. A handwritten envelope tucked under our windshield wiper. No name, no signature. Just a piece of paper that said, "Your gate must be repainted to HOA-approved color. Gray only, not black." We didn't think much of it. Melissa crumpled it up, tossed it in the recycling bin, and went on with her day. Then a second note showed up, this time on our mailbox. "No livestock is allowed within Pine Hill jurisdiction. You are in violation of Section 8B. Except we weren't. We checked the maps before we bought the place. Our property wasn't technically under HOA control. The HOA president, Karen, simply assumed she could control us too, because our driveway touched a shared private road. Melissa decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. She even attended a local HOA meeting to introduce herself and let them know we were respectful neighbors. That's when things turned sour. Karen took one look at Melissa in her jeans and ranch boots and sniffed. "I hope you're not planning to keep any animals," she said, curling her lip. "This isn't a zoo." Melissa just smiled politely. "We're within our rights, but we're good people. You won't have any trouble from us." Karen laughed and leaned in. "We'll see about that." From that day on, it was war. Karen started walking her dog past our fence every single day, sometimes more than once. She'd slow down, take pictures, and shake her head like we were building a nuclear lab instead of a chicken coop. One afternoon, she even stood outside yelling at our ranch hand, a young guy named Tony, accusing him of polluting the water because he was rinsing a muddy boot near the creek. Melissa confronted her calmly. "Karen, Please stay on your side of the fence. Karen's voice rose an octave. You don't tell me what to do. You're just a housewife with a badge from some fake town police department. I saw my wife's eye twitch, but she didn't rise to the bait. I'm not going to argue with you. Please stay off our land. Karen huffed and stormed off. It got worse when we installed a small camera by the gate, purely for safety, since coyotes had been snooping around. Karen marched up to the gate and started waving her arms in front of the lens like we were spying on her. Take that down. It's an invasion of privacy, she screamed from outside our fence. Melissa had had enough. Karen, you've trespassed twice now. If you do it again, I'll take legal action. But Karen didn't listen. Instead, she doubled down. She brought the entire HOA board with her one Sunday morning and stood outside our fence pointing and ranting about how we were a disgrace to the neighborhood. They said our barn was an eyesore, that Melissa's police vehicle made the place look like a crime scene, that our goats were dangerous. Dangerous goats. You heard me. One of the board members, a gray-haired man named Bob, tried to be civil. You know, if you just repaint the gate, maybe plant a few hedges, folks wouldn't be so upset. Melissa nodded. We'll consider it. Karen scoffed. We shouldn't have to ask nicely. You're not above the rules, even if you pretend to be law enforcement. That was the last straw. Melissa pulled out her badge and said, I'm not pretending. I'm the police chief of this county. Karen's jaw dropped. But then, she laughed. You expect me to believe that? The next morning, Karen walked right through our gate, past the private property sign, and stood near the barn with her phone out. When Melissa saw her through the window, she went outside to ask her to leave. And that's when Karen screamed and called 911. And that's where we were, me, standing in shock. Melissa, in uniform. Karen, still shouting into her phone, as the real police sirens screamed closer and closer. You could see Karen's face start to change. But she hadn't figured it out yet. She didn't know who she just called the cops on. And as the squad cars rolled up, one of the officers stepped out of the vehicle, looked at Melissa, and saluted. Karen's eyes widened, but before a word could be said, Melissa looked past Karen's shoulder and pointed to the barn. Karen, what's in your hand? Karen turned, and in that moment she dropped her phone. Because something Karen wasn't supposed to have, had just fallen from her purse, right there in front of the cops. The object lay on the gravel, catching the morning sun like a secret trying to stay hidden. A silver master key. Not just any key, a universal gate key issued only to HOA board members. Each was tagged, logged, and supposed to stay in HOA headquarters unless approved for official inspections. Karen froze. One of the officers stepped forward and picked it up with a gloved hand. He turned it over, reading the tag number. He looked at Melissa. Chief, isn't this key part of the HOA lock system? I thought they weren't supposed to leave the office. Melissa nodded slowly, her voice cool. Correct. These are only used for board-authorized property checks. On actual HOA land. Karen's face turned pale. She stammered, I have permission. I was told to conduct a spot inspection. Melissa cocked her head. On my private ranch? Karen looked around, searching for support. But even the HOA members who'd tagged along were backing away, arms folded and lips sealed. The officer stepped aside, looking toward Melissa. Do you want to press charges, ma'am? Karen gasped. Press charges on me? You should arrest her. She was threatening me. That's when another officer, Sergeant Daniels, spoke up. Karen, she's your county police chief. You're standing on her land, without permission. That's trespassing. Karen's jaw dropped so hard it could have cracked the driveway. She can't be. She said she was just a housewife. Melissa gave a tight smile. I'm both. Housewife and police chief. Multitasking. The standoff broke when Karen, face flushed red with embarrassment, shoved her phone into her purse and stormed off without another word. No apology, no explanation. Just the sound of her heels grinding against the gravel. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. After the incident, Melissa decided not to press charges, yet. "Let's see if she can behave herself," she said, trying to take the high road. I admired her for that. But Karen wasn't done. The very next week, we received a thick envelope in our mailbox. Inside were 5 separate citations issued by the HOA board, each one more ridiculous than the last. One for the color of our fence, one for unapproved security equipment, the camera, one for disturbance by livestock, our 3 quiet goats named Larry, Mo, and Curly, one for aggressive signage, our private property plaque, and one for impersonation of law enforcement. Melissa's hands trembled as she read that one out loud. "Impersonation?" she whispered, eyes narrowing. "That's the last straw." That evening, Melissa sat down at her home office desk, pulled up the official map of HOA zoning boundaries, and cross-checked them with our property deed. Then she sent an email, not just to the HOA board, but to the city zoning department, the county clerk, the sheriff's department, and yes, even the mayor's office. She attached photos, maps, legal docs, and a simple statement. "My land is not under HOA jurisdiction. These citations are illegal. I am filing a formal complaint." The next morning, Karen showed up again. This time, not at the ranch, at Melissa's workplace. The front desk officer called her up. "Chief, there's a woman in the lobby demanding to speak with you. Says she's your neighbor and that you're abusing your position." Melissa met her in the hallway. Karen was pacing like a tiger behind glass. "You're making me look bad," she hissed. "Do you think anyone will listen to your legal talk when I've been on the HOA board for 15 years? Melissa didn't blink. "Karen, I don't need to make you look bad. You're doing that just fine by yourself." Karen leaned in. "You may think you're powerful now, but you don't understand how these things work. People like you don't last long around here." Melissa's eyebrows raised. "People like me?" Karen didn't say another word, just turned and walked out of the station like she owned the place. I knew then this wasn't just about our property anymore. It was about power, ego, control. That evening, we got a surprise call. It was Bob, the older HOA board member, the one who had tried to be kind. He asked if we could meet him at the ranch gate. Melissa and I drove out in the ATV. When we arrived, Bob was there, but he wasn't alone. He'd brought a folder. "I think you should see this," he said quietly, looking over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. He handed it to Melissa. Inside were copies of HOA financial documents, minutes from closed meetings, and, most shocking, a list of fake violations Karen had written up to punish people she didn't like. Ours were on top. Melissa flipped through the pages slowly, her face calm. Then she looked up. "Why are you giving this to me, Bob?" Bob looked tired. "Because I'm retiring. And because someone needs to put an end to her nonsense. She's been bullying people for years. You're the first one who hasn't backed down." Melissa nodded slowly. "You did the right thing." He gave a small smile. "Hope you know what you're starting." And just like that, he turned and walked away. That night we sat on the porch, the folder spread across the table between us. "This isn't just about us anymore," Melissa said. "If she's doing this to us, she's doing it to others." I nodded. "What do we do?" Melissa stared out at the dark fields for a long time. "We build a case," she whispered, "and we take her down, legally." But just when we thought we were in control, our barn caught fire. The glow lit up the night like a rising sun. Flames snapped and popped, sending black smoke spiraling into the air. We ran barefoot, shouting, trying to spray water from every hose we had. But it was too late. The barn, the heart of our ranch, was gone. And as I stood there watching it burn, something flickered in the corner of my vision. A shape, a figure, Karen, standing by the edge of the trees, watching, smiling. I froze. Smoke stung my eyes, but I saw her clearly. Karen, standing dead still by the edge of the woods behind our pasture, arms crossed, face glowing orange from the flames. And worst of all, she was smiling. I shouted, "Hey, Karen, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer. She didn't flinch. She just turned slowly, like she had all the time in the world, and walked back into the shadows. By the time Melissa turned to look, she was gone. I ran toward the tree line with a flashlight, barefoot and coughing, but she'd already disappeared into the brush. The woods behind our property stretched a mile wide, and by then, flames were licking the last of the old barn's roof. I couldn't chase ghosts and fight a fire at the same time. Melissa called the fire department. They got there within minutes and worked through the night, soaking the remains and checking for accelerants. Because yes, it wasn't an accident. The fire chief pulled us aside once things cooled. "Preliminary look shows a trail of lighter fluid along the base," he said, frowning. "Definitely arson, but no cameras caught anyone. You didn't see anything?" Melissa hesitated, then shook her head. "Not clearly." I glanced at her. "You're not going to report what you saw?" She looked down. "Not yet. Not until I have proof." We stood in silence, the sound of dripping water and cinders the only thing between us. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. The remains of the barn were cold and black. Our goats had been moved to Tony's uncle's place 2 counties over. The chickens were safe. They'd been on the other side of the property, but Melissa barely spoke a word that entire week. She spent her time in the garage sorting through the folder Bob had given us, marking things, connecting dots, highlighting names. I brought her coffee one night and asked, "Are we going to tell the insurance company?" She nodded. "Already did. But the minute we claim, Karen's going to twist it. Make it look like we started the fire for money. She'll spin it." "Then what's the plan?" Melissa pulled out a map. "I'm going to expose the entire HOA board. Karen's not the only one. There's a pattern in the violations. She's targeting landowners who don't fit her picture of the neighborhood." I saw a list of names under hers, all crossed out in red. Families who had moved out, young couples, a retired veteran, a single mom, even a preacher. All had been fined. All had mysteriously sold their homes. I clenched my fist. "She's pushing people out," Melissa nodded. "And I'm going to prove it." That Friday, something unexpected happened. A young woman named Casey rang our doorbell. She was nervous, holding a brown folder and looking over her shoulder. I used to live on Elmridge Drive," she said, 3 blocks inside the HOA gates. We let her in. She sat at our kitchen table and opened the folder. Inside were copies of the exact same fake citations we'd received, word for word. "She did it to me too," Casey said, tears welling up, "all because I had a rainbow flag on my porch. She said it violated community decor standards. I tried to fight her, but the board backed her up. I got fined until I couldn't afford to stay anymore. Had to move in with my sister." Melissa leaned forward. "Do you have any emails? Witnesses?" Casey shook her head. "Only screenshots. But if you're doing something, I want in." Melissa smiled gently. "You just did more than enough." It was happening. One by one, people started coming forward. They emailed, called, even left anonymous letters in our mailbox. Karen had been running her little HOA empire like a kingdom, collecting favors, controlling neighbors, driving out anyone who stood up to her. She'd even taken kickbacks from a local developer to pressure homeowners to sell, then fast-track zoning changes. Melissa gathered everything, labeled it, built the case. But Karen wasn't blind. She started sending her own people, neighbors loyal to her, folks who owed her favors. They walked past our driveway taking photos. One even came up to Tony and offered him money to find out what the chief is hiding. Tony laughed in his face. The next day, we found our mailbox smashed open. It was like a threat written in bent metal. Melissa didn't even flinch. She filed a report with the sheriff's office, called the county attorney, and told me, "We're almost ready." Almost. That Sunday, I went to town for groceries. Melissa stayed home to finish documenting the witness statements. When I got back, the front door was slightly open. I rushed inside. "Melissa?" No answer. My heart raced as I looked through the rooms. Everything seemed normal, until I got to the back of the house. Our office was trashed, papers scattered, drawers yanked open, Melissa's laptop missing, and on the desk, written with a marker on the whiteboard, "You should have just left." I grabbed my phone, about to call Melissa, when the back door creaked open, and there she stood, mud on her shoes, hair wild, and holding a USB stick. Her face was pale but determined. "What happened?" I asked, rushing over. She held up the USB. "I was one step ahead," she said, her voice steady. "I backed everything up last night." I stared at her. "And the office?" "Karen." "How do you know?" Melissa took a deep breath. "Because I followed her. This morning. She met with 2 board members at the abandoned grocery warehouse off Route 9. She placed a photo on the table. Karen, standing next to a man who'd just been indicted for fraud last year, a developer we'd seen in the papers." Melissa narrowed her eyes. "She's laundering HOA funds." I stepped back, stunned. "So what now?" She looked at the wall where her whiteboard used to hang. Now we bring the fire to her door." But before I could respond, a sheriff's deputy SUV pulled up in our driveway. Melissa went out to meet him. They spoke quietly. Then she turned back to me, face dark. "They want me to step down while they review a complaint filed against me." "What? From who?" She didn't blink. "Karen and 3 board members. They're accusing me of harassment, corruption, and misconduct." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "They're trying to bury you." Melissa didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at the deputy's SUV as it rolled away and whispered, "They started a fire they can't control." 3 days. That's how long they gave her. 3 days of administrative leave, while the city council reviewed the false complaint filed by Karen and her loyal board members. They accused Melissa of using her badge to intimidate residents, falsify documents, and cause emotional distress to the HOA community. It was laughable, but it was working. For the first time since we moved to the ranch, Melissa's badge was off her belt. It sat quietly on the kitchen counter next to her morning coffee. She hadn't touched it all day. I walked in and found her standing by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the charred barn foundation. "They're trying to humiliate you," I said gently. She didn't look at me. "That's exactly what they want. Not just to silence me, but to make an example out of me. If they can drag down the police chief, imagine what they've done to others who had no power." She turned and I saw it. Not defeat, but fire. "I won't let it happen." She reached into her bag and pulled out the USB drive. "Everything's still here, but it's not enough to fight them quietly anymore. We're going public." That evening, we met up with Casey and 2 other former residents at a quiet diner off the county line. One of them, James, had been evicted after refusing to pay multiple lawn care fines issued when he was hospitalized. Another, Marcia, had tried to sue Karen for harassment. She lost. Her lawyer later admitted he had a personal friendship with the HOA vice president. They all brought documents, stories, emails, proof. Melissa laid it all out on the table, forming a network of abuse that had gone unnoticed for years. "They've been doing this to everyone who didn't fit their picture," she said. "Single moms, LGBTQ residents, veterans, people of color. If you didn't fall in line, they fined you, pressured you, or forced you out." James leaned forward. "But what can we do? We don't have money for lawyers. They'll crush us again." Melissa smiled, but not kindly. "They used their rules. I'm going to use mine." She tapped the USB. "The HOA has a clause in their founding charter that allows for emergency board review by city officials if more than 5 formal complaints are received within a 48-hour window. We already have 4. If we get just 2 more, I can file it." "But they suspended you," I said. "You can't do it as the police chief." She nodded. "Then I'll do it as a citizen." And the next morning, Melissa made her move. She uploaded everything: the documents, the audio recordings, the video clips of Karen yelling, the map overlays, and even the list of manipulated citations, to an online public portal titled, "The HOA No One Voted For, Pine Hill Exposed." She included a short message. "My name is Melissa Carter. I am a citizen of this county, a mother, a wife, and currently your suspended police chief. What you are about to read is not just about me. It's about what happens when no one stands up to bullies in power. I'm standing up now." Within hours, the post exploded. Comments poured in. People started sharing their own stories, pictures of letters, videos of Karen shouting. Even former HOA board members, quiet ones, came forward to say they had been pressured, manipulated, and even threatened into silence. Local reporters picked it up. One segment aired a full breakdown on the evening news with a split screen of Karen's rules and a list of actual HOA regulations that contradicted her claims. Then came the emails from the mayor's office, and the county attorney, and the zoning board. Melissa's case was being reopened, and Karen was losing control. But she didn't go quietly. That evening, just after sundown, we heard loud banging at the front gate. Tony opened the door and peeked out. "She's here," he whispered, "with two of her people." Melissa and I stepped outside. Karen stood by the gate, fuming. "You think you're smart, don't you?" she hissed. "Posting lies online? Spreading gossip like a teenager?" Melissa didn't even blink. "Truth isn't gossip, Karen. And if you're so sure it's lies, why are you sweating?" Karen stepped closer, her finger wagging. "I built this community. You're just a fake cop with a badge and a loud mouth, and I'm going to finish what I started." She reached into her purse again and pulled out a rolled set of papers. She threw them through the gate at Melissa's feet. "What's that?" I asked. "A notice," Karen spat. "Effective immediately. The HOA is issuing a lien on your property for failure to comply with community regulations. You'll be paying thousands in fines by the end of the month, or we move to foreclose." My chest tightened, but Melissa didn't move. She picked up the papers, unfolded them, and smiled. "You really are desperate," she said. "You just issued a lien using an HOA clause that doesn't apply to us. Our deed has the exemption, Karen. You never had authority here." Karen's face changed, like her soul just realized it was standing naked in front of the truth. "You have no idea what you've started," she whispered. "I know exactly what I've started," Melissa replied. And then, a black SUV pulled up behind Karen. Out stepped the county investigator. Karen turned, startled. "Karen Wilson?" the man asked. "You've been named in a formal investigation regarding abuse of position, unlawful citations, destruction of property, and potential arson." Karen's jaw dropped. "What? This is harassment." Melissa folded her arms. "Funny. That's what you accused me of." The investigator handed her a document. "You are required to appear for a board hearing this week. Refusal to cooperate may result in legal action." Karen stood frozen, for once, silent. But just as we turned to walk back inside, the investigator stopped us. "There's one more thing," he said. "We received a new anonymous tip, something that ties Karen to the developer who's been bribing HOA boards across 3 counties. Melissa's eyes widened. "What kind of tip?" He opened his briefcase, pulled out a photo. Karen, at a private airport, handing off an envelope. And the man next to her? The same developer from the abandoned warehouse. The one from Melissa's photo. The investigator looked grim. "This goes deeper than just citations. If that envelope is what we think it is, she could be facing federal charges." Then he turned to us. "Prepare yourselves. It's going to get uglier before it gets better." But before we could even react, Melissa's phone buzzed. She checked the screen. Her jaw dropped. She held it up. "The mayor's office. They're reinstating me." I blinked. "What?" Melissa grinned. "The complaint was dropped. They reviewed the evidence. I'm back on duty." But before we could celebrate, boom! An explosion rocked the side of our house. Windows rattled. Lights flickered. Smoke began to pour from the guest shed behind the barn. We ran out, coughing and shouting. The shed was on fire. Again. Another attack. But this time, there were footprints leading away from the scene. Big ones. And they were fresh. Melissa whispered, "She's not done." But neither are we. The fire roared behind us, crackling through the guest shed as flames danced into the night sky. I grabbed the hose while Tony sprinted for the fire extinguisher. Melissa, already dialing dispatch, was barking into her phone. "This is Chief Melissa Carter. We have a second confirmed arson attack on our property. Get units here now. I want roadblocks set at every exit from Pine Hill." She wasn't just back on duty. She was back with fire in her eyes. Within 10 minutes, red and blue lights painted our driveway. The responding officers and fire team worked quickly to control the flames. Thankfully, no one was inside the shed, but the structure was a loss. Again. An officer approached. "We've got boot prints this time, Chief, clear as day. We'll have the lab on them by morning." Melissa nodded. "I already know whose they are. I want surveillance on Karen Wilson tonight. No contact. Just eyes." The officer looked stunned. "You think she did this?" Melissa didn't blink. "I know she did." The next morning, the official investigation into Karen Wilson and the Pine Hill HOA board made front-page news. Police chief targeted an HOA power scandal. Social media was exploding. Dozens of residents began posting their own horror stories with the HOA, ranging from unfair fines to property damage and harassment. Casey and Marcia had started a support group and were organizing a formal town hall. Melissa was reinstated fully, with a press conference scheduled for later that week. The mayor called personally to apologize. Everything seemed to be moving our way. But we knew better than to relax, because people like Karen don't fall quietly. 2 days later, a young officer named Wells stopped by our home with an envelope in hand. He'd been working under Melissa for years. He handed it over. This showed up in the internal department inbox. No return address, just this note. Inside the envelope were photos, blurry, zoomed-in shots taken through long-range lenses, of Melissa, in her uniform, in our kitchen, in our driveway, at the school pickup line, and one was of us asleep in our bedroom. Melissa's breath hitched. She gripped the edge of the table. "There's only one place you could get this angle from." I stepped closer to the window, then bolted outside. Sure enough, a tree on the edge of our property had fresh bark scrapes. A branch had been cut. A camera mount was bolted into the crook, now empty. Someone had been watching us. Up close. For weeks. We called the sheriff's office and installed more motion-activated cameras. I started sleeping with a flashlight and crowbar under the bed. Melissa had her sidearm locked and loaded at night. And still, Karen hadn't been arrested. The city investigation was crawling. Technicalities, reviews. Chain of command, they said. Melissa had spent years teaching officers to follow the law precisely. But this was stretching the law to its breaking point. So she made a decision. She'd had enough of waiting. That Thursday, Melissa went on live TV. A press conference was set up outside the city courthouse. Dozens of reporters, community members, former victims of HOA harassment. Even our ranch hand, Tony, stood in the back with folded arms, watching silently. Melissa stepped up to the microphone. "My name is Chief Melissa Carter. For the last few months, my home has been attacked, my career threatened, my family stalked, all by a woman named Karen Wilson, the president of the Pine Hill Estates HOA. Flashes popped. But this isn't just about me. It's about dozens, maybe hundreds of residents who were forced out, fined illegally, and harassed because they didn't meet the personal standards of a corrupt board. Karen Wilson and those who enabled her used their positions to intimidate good people. They've abused power. And today," she held up a folder, "we're pressing charges." The crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Melissa turned and handed the folder to the county prosecutor, who nodded solemnly. As she stepped down from the podium, I met her at the steps. We hugged tightly. "We're really doing this," I whispered. She nodded. "But it's not over." And she was right. Because later that night, we found our front door wide open. Nothing was stolen, no glass broken. But on our living room wall, written in red spray paint, were 3 words. "You were warned." I ran to check the house. Tony checked the barn and the back shed. Melissa walked straight to the bedroom, opened her drawer, and pulled out her duty pistol. "We're being hunted," I said. She nodded. And then she said something that chilled me to the bone. "Karen's not just desperate, she's got help." By morning, security footage showed a masked figure entering our home at 2:34 a.m. They had the front door code. Melissa's eyes narrowed. Only 4 people knew that code. We changed every lock, reset every password, and filed another report. Still, Karen remained untouchable. Every time Melissa tried to move forward, something stalled. A file misplaced, a call missed, a legal process under review, until finally, we got a letter from the county courthouse. Karen Wilson had filed a restraining order against Melissa, claiming harassment, intimidation, and misuse of official power to slander a private citizen. Melissa opened the letter slowly. Her fingers trembled, but her jaw was set. This woman tried to burn down our property. She broke into our home, she stalked us, and now she's playing the victim. I looked at the paperwork. What does it mean? She's trying to drag me into court as a criminal before I can bring her in as one. "But you have the evidence." Melissa looked at me and nodded. "Yes, but she has the head of the HOA legal board in her pocket, and they've scheduled the hearing for tomorrow." She stood up, grabbed her badge, and clipped it back on her belt. "They want a war?" Her voice dropped. "They're about to get one." The courtroom was small, too small for the war that was about to unfold inside it. Melissa sat at the defendant's table, calm and unshaken. She wore her full police uniform, freshly pressed. Her badge gleamed. Her boots were polished. Her hands rested firmly on the table like she had nothing to hide, and everything to prove. I sat behind her, my heart pounding. Karen was across the aisle, dressed in beige like she was attending a garden party. Her face wore a smug expression. Next to her sat her attorney, a sharp-jawed man with cold eyes. The same man who'd once represented the HOA in a zoning case we'd exposed just last week. This was no accident. The judge entered. "Court is now in session. We are here to hear the plaintiff, Karen Wilson, in the matter of a temporary restraining order against the defendant, Chief Melissa Carter." Karen stood quickly. "Your Honor, this woman has harassed me for months. She's slandered my name across the internet, misused her badge to frighten me, and even encouraged vigilante behavior against my home. I no longer feel safe in my own community." The judge looked to Melissa. Response? Melissa rose slowly. Her voice was steady. "Your Honor, I have been the target of harassment. I have documented proof that Ms. Wilson trespassed on my property, called in a false emergency, and possibly orchestrated 2 acts of arson. I've turned over surveillance, witness testimonies, and even HOA internal documents showing she has abused her authority for years. She's not scared of me. She's scared of exposure." Karen scoffed. "This is a smear campaign. You're twisting the truth." The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Wilson, let her finish." Melissa continued. "This isn't about a restraining order. It's about control. And I will not back down, not when innocent families have been pushed out of their homes. I have upheld the law every step of the way. And I brought everything I have to this court today." She turned and handed the clerk a flash drive. Contained on this drive are over 50 documents, videos, and signed statements, including one from your own court-appointed mediator, confirming Ms. Wilson's use of intimidation tactics. I submit them all as evidence." The judge took a long pause, then nodded to the bailiff. "We'll take a brief recess to review these materials." Karen stood and stormed out of the courtroom, muttering curses. I followed Melissa into the hallway. "You did incredible," I said. She smiled faintly. "Now we wait." But we didn't have to wait long. 30 minutes later, the judge returned. "I have reviewed the evidence," he said slowly. "And it is the finding of this court that the request for a restraining order is not only denied, but that sufficient concern has been raised to recommend immediate escalation to the county attorney's office for a formal criminal investigation into Ms. Wilson's actions as president of the Pine Hill HOA. Karen's face went white. The courtroom gasped. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary protective order in favor of Chief Carter, as there is now reasonable evidence to believe Ms. Wilson has unlawfully surveilled and harassed her and her family. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. "And Karen?" she screamed. "You think this is over?" she shrieked. "You don't know who you're messing with." Melissa didn't flinch. She turned, locked eyes with her, and calmly replied, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." But we didn't even make it to the parking lot before the next storm hit. Melissa's phone buzzed. It was Tony. He was at the ranch, checking in on repairs. "Chief," he said breathlessly, "I just found a small black box under your porch. Looked like some kind of tracker or mic. I took a picture and sent it to you." Melissa opened the image. A tiny GPS tracker, no bigger than a matchbox, taped to the wood near the steps. Hidden. "Whoever's helping Karen," she whispered. "They're getting serious." We raced home, called the sheriff, and turned over the device. They dusted it for prints. Then we installed new cameras, extra locks, night vision sensors along the trees. Melissa refused to leave the house that night. "I want them to try something again," she muttered. "This time I'm ready." The next morning, the real bombshell dropped. Casey called. Her voice shook with adrenaline. "Melissa, you need to see this. A private investigator just shared something in our HOA support group chat. Video footage. Karen met with someone last night. At the park." Melissa put the call on speaker as I pulled it up on our laptop. The footage showed Karen walking across a parking lot, shady and grainy but visible. She shook hands with a man wearing a hood, then handed him something wrapped in a cloth. The PI's caption read, "Former HOA board treasurer, fired last year. His name's Ray Donovan. He used to handle HOA legal disputes, and there's a sealed record of an old fire claim under his name. Could be linked." Melissa paused the video. That name, Ray Donovan, rang a bell. She flipped open her file box and pulled out a name sheet from the folder Bob gave her. There it was. Ray Donovan. Fired. Reason: internal misconduct. Sealed. Melissa tapped the desk. If he's involved, then Karen has access to everything. Past HOA files, lock codes, even legal records. We called the investigator. He confirmed Ray was seen entering the back of the HOA office after hours with Karen's keycard. Now it all made sense. The fake citations, the insider access, the false court filings. Karen wasn't acting alone. She had a network, and we had no idea how deep it went. That night, we installed backup power on the cameras in case someone tried to cut them again. And just as I was locking the side gate before bed, I saw something glinting near the bushes. I knelt down, pulled it out. A bullet casing, still warm. I shouted for Melissa. She came running, examined it. "This isn't intimidation anymore," she said, her voice low. "This is a threat. A direct one." I looked around, suddenly feeling watched. "You think someone's out there now?" She raised her weapon. "If they are..." She turned to me, eyes steady. "Then they just made their final mistake." We didn't sleep that night. Melissa stayed up, watching the monitors from our home's new surveillance system, eyes locked on every flicker in the trees. I stayed close, clutching the crowbar like it was a sword. The bullet casing had changed everything. It wasn't a game anymore. Someone had loaded a weapon. Someone had stood there watching our home. Waiting. By morning, the sheriff's department had swarmed the property. Deputies swept the area. Crime scene tape went up. They found boot prints again, Same size, same pattern as the ones near the shed fire. This time, though, they led back to the HOA community, straight to the woods behind Karen's house. A search warrant was issued within hours, and by noon officers had swarmed Karen's pristine, flower-lined yard with flashlights, gloves, and evidence bags. Melissa stayed outside the yellow tape, her arms crossed. A deputy came out of Karen's garage with a plastic tub. Inside, HOA records, financial ledgers, spare master keys, and in a black case, a hunting rifle, unregistered, with fresh powder residue on the barrel. Karen, standing on her porch in her robe, screamed at the top of her lungs, "This is a setup, it's all fake. She planted that. She's the cop, she could have planted everything." But no one listened anymore. She was cuffed on her front steps and placed in the back of a cruiser. The HOA board vice president, who had arrived in a panic, was also taken in for questioning when he tried to stop the warrant from being executed. It was finally happening, the unraveling. Back at the ranch, Melissa stood by the gate where it all began, where Karen had once screamed that she was calling the cops on a woman who was the chief of police. She looked out over our property, the charred barn, the rebuilt fence, the fresh security lights. Then she turned to me. "She really thought she could burn us out," she said quietly. "But all she did," I replied, "was light the match that exposed her to the world." She smiled, not with pride, but with peace. Over the next 2 weeks, everything came tumbling down for Pine Hill's infamous HOA. Karen was formally charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, arson, stalking, and unlawful surveillance. Investigators traced several of the fake citations and found links to illegal bonuses paid out to certain board members using HOA dues. Ray Donovan, the disgraced former treasurer, turned himself in and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentencing. His confession confirmed everything. He admitted to helping Karen forge documents, erase violations for her allies, and even plant the GPS tracker on our house. Most chilling of all, he admitted to placing the bullet casing outside our home as a scare tactic, something Karen had allegedly ordered. Karen, of course, denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. The court denied her bail. She sat in jail awaiting trial. And the HOA dissolved. The city council, after receiving hundreds of letters and signatures from residents, voted unanimously to revoke Pine Hill HOA's authority over the region. All HOA powers were transferred to city code enforcement. It was over. On the day it was officially announced, Melissa stood before a packed town hall and gave one final speech. "I didn't fight back because I was the police chief," she said. "I fought back because I was tired of watching good people get trampled by bad power. I fought because everyone deserves to feel safe in their home. That's what justice means to me." Thunderous applause, tears in many eyes. Even Bob, the retired HOA board member who started this all by slipping us the folder, was there. He walked up to Melissa afterward, shook her hand, and said, "You gave this town its voice back." Back at the ranch, months later, peace finally returned. We rebuilt the barn, this time with stronger beams, a fireproof roof, and Melissa's badge number engraved above the door. The goats came home. Tony stayed on full-time. Casey now worked as Melissa's assistant at the station. And Karen? She stayed in jail. Her trial was set for the following spring, with national media planning to cover it as a landmark case in HOA abuse. One evening, as we sat under the stars, Melissa leaned her head on my shoulder. "Do you remember the first time she screamed at me by the gate?" she asked. I chuckled. "Yeah, she had no clue you were the law." "She tried to call the cops on me," Melissa whispered, her voice soft and satisfied. "Now she sees them every day." I turned and kissed her forehead. "And they all report to you." She laughed for the first time in weeks. That night, under the wide-open sky, the lights of our newly rebuilt barn glowing behind us and the scent of fresh hay in the breeze, we sat in silence. Not because we were afraid, not because we were plotting our next move, but because, for the first time in a long time, we were home. Truly home. And no one, not even an HOA tyrant like Karen, could take that away again.